I will not allow my speech to be censored by representatives who have taken millions of dollars from AIPAC, a pro-Israel lobby. Joe Biden has taken over $7 million from AIPAC during his 40-some year career. So I do not trust his judgment. I do not trust the judgment of any of these fucking corrupt politicians that say whether Israel is right or wrong.
Yeah!
These people are not morally qualified to allocate what my taxes are going to. Our taxes are going to genocide. Our taxes are going to fund a proxy state that acts on behalf of the U.S. empire. And I will not sit back and be silent while they steal my goddamn money to kill 10,000 children around the country. As Malcolm X says, the Zionist argument to justify Israel's present occupation of Arab Palestine has no intelligent or legal basis in history. The state of Israel is nothing more than an extension of the white supremacy that is manufactured in this country. I was one of the activists that went to Anthony Blinken's house yesterday. Because these motherfuckers can't get a day of peace while we are spending our fucking money on genocide. Over 60% of the country supports a ceasefire. But we know that a ceasefire is not the end of this fight. We will not stop fucking fighting until all 7.2 million Palestinian people get a right to return to their sovereign motherfucking land.
Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. That was activist Afeni, who I've met multiple times. Afeni is a real one that was at a protest there in DC in reference to the Palestinian struggle there. And I cannot disagree with anything that Afeni said there. Very powerful speaker. But welcome to the show, guys. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Rumble and Twitter. We are back. Happy Sunday, guys. We have some really interesting stories for you today. I have to tell you, I just finished. I was wondering if I was going to be able to make sure I'm on time. I actually just finished watching the Ravens and Rams game, which went into overtime. That game was crazy and wild. Okay. So for those of you who are new and don't know, I am a big football fanatic. So yeah, I was doing the thing earlier today. But welcome back, guys. I hope you've had a great weekend so far. We have a lot to discuss. I want to go ahead and give a shout out to patrons. We're going to jump right in. I usually give shout outs to people in the chat, but on Sundays, I try to go ahead and jump right in because I do have a hard stop on Sundays. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: Ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters, Sabbies, and of course, members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. So shout out to all the Sabby patrons. Thank you guys so much, keeping the lights on around here. So what's up, guys? You guys will have to excuse me today. I'm feeling a little frizzy. It's humid. Just 2 days ago, it was like, 30 something degrees. I was like, we're finally in winter. Okay. I was like, we're finally in winter. The air was a little bit dry. So I was like, it's time to take out the humidifier from the closet, pull out the humidifier. And then today it warms up and it rains. And so now it's like humid. So I'm feeling a little frizzy. It just is what it is. I'm feeling a little frizzy today. Anywho, let's go ahead and share that beautiful thumbnail and tell you what we are discussing today. Today is going to be an educational session because you are going to learn some things on the Sabby Sabs podcast show today. So we are discussing, if you have not heard, you are going to hear about this now. Cornel West and Norm Finkelstein event that was in New York City. They did stream that. I'm going to talk about, there's certain parts in that event that I do want to touch on that I think are very relevant and very important. We're also going to discuss, I don't know if you heard about this, but apparently Glenn Greenwald has been banned. And from what platform? We're going to get into that. We're also going to discuss Abby Martin on Israel's plan. So Abby Martin has been very vocal about what is happening to the Palestinian people in Gaza. She's going to lay out the roadmap. We're also going to take a look at something Abby tried to warn us about 2 years ago. And last but not least, we are going to discuss the billionaire threat. That gentleman there in the picture, his name is Bill Ackman. The woman next to him is the president of the University of Pennsylvania. Guys, I've said it on the show before and I'll say it again. Billionaires are a huge threat. This really is our enemy. You have to understand that. And I'm going to use the example that just happened over the past couple of days involving Bill Ackman and these presidents at these universities to prove my point. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you, Giselle. Finding Sabby's channel has been a bright spot in my challenging year. Doobie-doobie-doo. Thank you so much and welcome. I used to do this thing where I used to ask people like, how did you find me? So I'm going to do that again. I haven't done that in a long time. Let me know. How did you find this channel? You can go ahead and let me know in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and get started with the first story here. So the presidents of Harvard University, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania actually had a hearing with Congress recently in reference to student protests that have happened on their campus. Now, if you guys have not been aware, obviously there is a push now from the Zionist propaganda machine to basically say that students using the phrase, or actually anyone using the phrase from the river to the sea, they're saying that that involves the extermination of Jewish people, which it actually does not. We'll get into that. But now they have put pressure on these presidents of these specific universities. Now, some of you know this. If you're new, you may not. I worked in higher ed for over 10 years. I actually had the experience of working at Harvard University and MIT. I did not work at UPenn, so I can't really speak about the experiences there and what it's like to be on that campus. But I can speak about the experience from Harvard and MIT. So you have someone to talk about this that has actually worked at those schools. Imagine that. So we're going to go ahead and get started with this clip here from one. This is the testimonial here. This is the president of Harvard University, MIT, and the University of Pennsylvania. And they are basically being interrogated here by members of Congress. Listen to this.
At MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Yes or no? Calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment?
I have not heard calling for the genocide for Jews on our campus.
But you've heard chants for intifada.
I've heard chants, which can be anti-Semitic depending on the context, when calling for the elimination of the Jewish people.
So those would not be according to the MIT's code of conduct or rules?
That would be investigated as harassment if pervasive and severe.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
Let's pause here for a second. So you see what they're doing? So this is Miss Stefanik, right? So what they're doing is they're saying that the chants that the students were making is calling for genocide of Jewish people. The students have said multiple times that is not what those phrases refer to. If you speak to people who are Palestinian, you talk to people that have been to Gaza, they will also tell you that is not what those phrases mean here. But what you have to understand is you have to understand how the propaganda machine works, and more importantly, the PR machine. What they're doing is they're trying to make you focus on phrases, and they're trying to demonize those phrases as being anti-Semitic. And they're doing that so that you are now no longer paying attention to the actual genocide that's happening of the Palestinian people in Gaza. This is a PR strategy that has worked time and time again. And we'll get into a little bit more details later on about how PR strategies work in effort to smear people. So you got to understand, organizations like AIPAC, some of these billionaires that are also attached to the Israeli lobby, people like Bill Ackman, who we'll get into in just a second, you have to understand that these organizations and these people who are very powerful, these billionaires, they know how to do PR strategy 101. They are very successful in doing this. So now that all your attention is on these university professors and the phrases that the students used on campus, this diverts your attention away from the actual genocide that is happening in Gaza.
No.
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
I am asking, specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is.
So you see what's happening here. So Stefanik, you also have to know, is also in bed with the Israeli lobby. Like all of these people, they're playing their part, you guys. They're playing their part.
Depending upon the context, that is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If it if the
Yes
speech
or no?
becomes if the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment? This is unacceptable, Ms. McGill. I'm going to give you one more opportunity for the world to see your answer. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The answer is.
Let me say something here. What you have to understand is that rules and policies that universities have can be very vague. The language can be very vague. And I'll give you an example of one later on when we get to a tweet that talks about that now that the University of Pennsylvania is now changing their rules in reference to free speech on campus. And they also noticed, this could be a problem because the rule that they instated is actually very vague. And we'll get to that, because I want you to understand, when universities create these rules, they're not very specific. They're kind of vague, and they can be applied in different ways to different people, to different situations. And I always felt like that was on purpose so that the university wouldn't be held liable about certain, specific situations. But that's the thing. This is why the president, who's no longer the president of the University of Pennsylvania, that's why she's saying it depends on the situation. Because the rhetoric that the university has is vague, and it's vague on purpose. Let's continue.
Yes. And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
See?
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, at an individual.
It's
Severe,
targeted at
pervasive.
Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them?
So that's not completely true either, because some of the protesters are Jewish students. So just think about that. So you see the problem? This is why she's saying, again, this is the president of Harvard. She is saying it depends on the context, because it really does. And not just in reference to this situation, but other situations as well. For example, if a campus has a policy that says you cannot have hate speech, etc., well, what is defined as hate speech? So what if they have a rule that says, well, you cannot use the N-word, towards people on campus or whatever? Okay. What about when the N word is used in rap songs and it's not used with an ER at the end? Does that constitute as the same in reference to some type of hate speech? So you see, this is what I'm saying. Universities are known for doing this. It's very vague. And again, they do that to protect themselves. But again, you have to understand Ms. Stefanik, again, she's also tied to the Israeli lobby, like she's doing her part. Let's continue. We're about to wrap this part up and then we'll go on.
Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric. When
And is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
Let's pause here. You see? You see what's happening? Now, the university professors are actually correct. It does depend on the context. That's the thing. Now, if you look at the policy and you look at the rules on campus, does it tell you it depends on the context? No, it doesn't. Again, it's vague. Now, let's move on, because the president of the University of Pennsylvania, after this hearing, has decided to resign. Let's go ahead and get into that clip.
The president of the University of Pennsylvania, Liz McGill, has resigned, and we've just gotten word that the chair of the University of Pennsylvania's Board of Trustees, Scott Bach, has also resigned, effective immediately. The UPenn controversy began spiraling earlier this week after McGill's testimony before Congress about anti-Semitism on campus.
Specifically calling for the genocide of Jews, does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context.
That was Tuesday, and this was the cleanup attempt by Liz McGill on Wednesday.
In that moment, I was focused on our university's longstanding policies aligned with the U.S. Constitution, which say that speech alone is not punishable. These policies need to be clarified and evaluated.
Notice what she just said there. She said the policies need to be clarified and evaluated. See what I was telling you about, how it's vague language? Well, they did decide to clarify it, but apparently that's going to be a problem too. We'll get into that.
That obviously was not enough, and of course she has now stepped down. So has the chair of the Board of Trustees at the University of Pennsylvania, and we have team coverage on all of this. CNN's Polo Sandoval, Matt Egan. Polo, let me start with you. What's the latest? What can you tell us?
The developments have been swift moving here, Jim, with Liz McGill tonight announcing that she will be stepping down amid that growing chorus of calls asking for her resignation in light of that testimony that she offered in Washington just this past Tuesday. In a statement released by the university, we have learned that McGill is expected to remain tenured as faculty at Penn Carey Law, and that she has also agreed to stay on at least until the interim president can potentially be appointed. For some context here, McGill has been under growing scrutiny for her handling of anti-Semitism on campus, and that testimony that was offered on Tuesday was really the last straw here, mainly referring to that, or at least her inability to just unequivocally say that any mention of genocide of Jewish people would be against the code of conduct at the university. We should also mention that, we heard from other university officials tonight, including one that we'll talk about here in a few moments, basically trying to paint a clearer picture of what he believed played out on Tuesday, saying that McGill was, quote, overprepared, that she was overlawyered, and essentially provided a legalistic answer to a moral question. So what you have now is coming from the now former chair of UPenn's Board of Trustees, trying to explain what was an absolutely disastrous testimony that played out on Tuesday.
Okay. So here's what people have to understand, because this all started with one gentleman in particular. Let me go ahead and pull this up, because I want people to understand the gentleman that you see on the thumbnail, Bill Ackman. Bill Ackman is a billionaire. He is one of the billionaires that donated to RFK Jr.'s campaign. He's one of the billionaires that said he's pro free speech and he's against censorship. He was heavily against the mandates, for example, so he spoke out against that. So there's this club of like billionaires that all got on this free speech campaign when it came to mandates in this country, that got on the free speech campaign when it came to the war in Ukraine. But the moment the tide started to swift and it went to Israel, things started to change. So Bill Ackman, let me pull him up. This gentleman here, he is the one who started all of this. What Bill Ackman did is he wrote a letter to Harvard University. He is a Harvard alum. He wrote a letter saying that he was very disappointed in the university with them not pushing back against the protests that were happening on campus. He was one of the first notable people to say that those protests were anti-Semitic, to say that those protests were terrifying to Jewish people. Again, you got to understand, this is to take your attention away from the suffering and the occupation and the oppression of the Palestinian people that is happening in Gaza. That's what this is about. So people like him, he's one of the ringleaders. He was the one who made the push against the university presidents. And this goes to show you again, so you see how quickly they had a hearing in front of Congress. This goes to show you the amount of power that billionaires have in not just in this country, but in the world. This is who we are up against. This is the people. These are people that we're fighting about. So when I bring up the class war in this country, you got to understand who really controlling things around here. And nobody becomes a billionaire without exploiting people along the way, okay? Now, The Root actually posted an article about him. Oh, I hate that it does that. It says, Harvard first Black president terrifies billionaire Bill Ackman. So let me show you what he said. Billionaire hedge fund manager Bill Ackman went on a racist tirade against Harvard's first Black president, Claudine Gay, on Thursday, claiming she was a diversity hire. Ackman said she would likely not have gotten the role if not for a fat finger on the scale. In his post on X, Ackman claimed to have inside knowledge of the search process, stating that Harvard president searched that the committee would not consider a candidate who did not meet the DEI office's criteria. Now, I got a question here. Why does a billionaire have inside information about Harvard employment search? Whether you agree with DEI or not, you should see the problem with this. It goes on to say, let me scoot down here. Make sure I'm going to the right one. Sorry. Circumstances aside, the attacks on Gay are nothing new to any Black person who's achieved any ounce of success, especially when that success triggers insecurity in the privileged and mediocre. Conservatives have long argued that Black students don't really belong at elite colleges and that affirmative action puts them in a position they're not prepared for. However, the data says the opposite. Forbes analyzed the Department of Education database and found that Black students at Harvard and Princeton actually graduate at higher rates than the overall student body. It goes on to say here, they talk about Ketanji Brown. It goes on to say here, the same is true of Gay, who holds a Stanford degree in economics and a PhD from Harvard. She also served as a professor at both institutions for more than 20 years. She's a bona fide heavyweight of academia, not some random off the street whose only qualification is that she's Black. That seems to unsettle some folks who couldn't wait to use the occasion of a congressional hearing at the intersection of freedom of expression, hate speech, and international humanitarian crisis to focus on why a Black woman got her job. You don't have to agree with how Gay has handled on-campus protests at Harvard to feel a bit weird about a man born into privilege and wealth calling her a diversity hire. Now, this isn't just about diversity, though. This is about someone like Bill Ackman, who is a billionaire, trying to silence the voices that he does not want to hear. The so-called pro-free speech person. But he only wants to be pro-free speech about certain issues, not the ones that make people like him uncomfortable. And this is what people really got to understand. So this guy wrote this letter to Harvard University, posted this information on Twitter, connected with other billionaires in his network, also connected to the Israeli lobby, and they got to work and they started a PR smear campaign. This is why I tell you, you can't trust these people. You cannot trust billionaires. Yeah, I get it. Some of these billionaires, they donate to philanthropies. That's nice. So they'll do good things every now and then. They may be nice to you sometimes. But hell, even a thief will be nice to you and steal your wallet. You have to understand, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, they are going to protect their class, corporate interest, and not the interests of the working class people and those who are oppressed. Now I want to show you how they do these smear campaigns, because I want people to learn something today. What is a smear campaign? Can you spot and beat one? Smear campaigns are an attempt by powerful figures to undermine someone's credibility and reputation with the goal of distracting public attention from something they are trying to keep quiet. Let's go on. People who work on causes like fundamental rights protection or protecting clean air and water, journalists who inform the public about government corruption or the harmful actions of corporations are increasingly being targeted by very public, very personal attacks against their character and work. These carefully orchestrated attacks, known as smear campaigns, can be used against almost anyone. But it's those people and organizations working for a freer, fair, and more transparent societies that are so often the victims. So what people have to understand is they typically go after people that are either trying to fight some type of social justice, oppression, people who are trying to fight for marginalized people, sometimes class issues, fighting for the working class. And they tend to go after people that typically don't have the money or the network to back them up. When Lee Camp was here Friday and we were talking about the difference between Zionism and Judaism, Lee Camp made this very clear. You guys have got to understand that organizations like AIPAC, J Street, the Zionist propaganda machine, these people are very organized. They are very strategic. The moment something is said that they don't like and they feel may hurt their bottom line or may make the state of Israel look bad to some, they already have a PR campaign ready to go. So what did they do? They have the billionaires come in and attack the presidents of the universities. They have the billionaires come in and they have AIPAC come in and attack the politicians that criticize Israel for the occupation of the Palestinian people and the genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. They're all working together. If you pay attention on Twitter, you pay attention on social media, you notice they're repeating the same talking points. This is how this works. They elevate it on social media. Next thing you know, they have ads that go out saying the same message, and then they repeat it over and over and over. Repetition, it sinks in. So then the next thing you know, you start to believe maybe they are right. These people are very skilled. They've been doing this for years. He goes on to say, come down here. What is a smear campaign? A smear campaign is an effort to damage someone's reputation, to undermine their credibility and the public's trust in them, to intimidate them, or even to silence their work altogether. It is done by disseminating damaging propaganda that most often avoids substantive critique of the actual work of the target or any relevant public interest, instead attacks the victim personally, or broadly smears or completely misrepresents what they do. So when you heard Stefanik criticizing the protest and the rhetoric that was used, that was an example of misrepresenting what the presidents and the students do at the university. That was misrepresentation. This is done through ad hominem attacks that might make use of distorted imagery or quotations taken out of context. You see how this works? Listen to this. In addition to effort to undermine someone's character or work, smear campaigns are also tools to divert attention. It is almost always the case that a smear campaign is launched by someone like a government, public figure, or a powerful corporation, in part to distract public attention from whatever they are doing or trying to keep quiet. This is a common feature, for example, of smear attacks that are launched against investigative journalists and activists. So we got to wake up, folks. This is what they do. Powerful organizations like AIPAC, powerful people like billionaires like Bill Ackman, people who have a lot of prestige, people who are well known in elite circles, and people who have access to mainstream media in ways that you and I will never have access to it. Who can be the victim of one? Smear campaigns can be used against individuals, organizations, or other groups. They have frequently been used to target politicians, other public figures, activists, and journalists. Smear campaigns against the latter two groups, in particular, civil rights and environmental activists and independent journalists and media outlets, have been increasingly common, even in the EU, especially against the backdrop of the pandemic. These are coordinated attacks. Coordinated attacks. Now, I want to show you how people show their whole ass when it comes to this issue. Because you see, Robert tweeted, I'm pro free speech until it directly advocates murder and genocide. I think the Wharton board has it right. He's referring to UPenn there, right? So they are changing. I'll show you in a second. They're changing their rules at the University of Pennsylvania after this. Glenn Greenwald responded and said, you're pro-free speech until it comes to Israel. You wouldn't support people being fired for saying flatten Gaza or bomb Iran. It's only about protecting this one foreign country. And Glenn Greenwald is 100% correct. Look at all the people who were champions for free speech before October 7th. Look at all these people. RFK Jr., David Sachs, Elon Musk, Bill Ackman, all these rich people. We must fight back against the censorship industrial complex. The moment Israel was the subject, all of a sudden, censor those people. Ban those people from those very same people. Now, I want to show you how they changed the rules and why this may now be a problem. And I tried to warn you something about what universities do. Jonathan Friedman said, oh, wow. The Wharton Board of Advisors at Pennsylvania has proposed a resolution to punish any student or faculty member that uses hate speech or celebrates murder or genocide. The proposed resolution is vague and threatens to ban wide swaths of speech. I could have warned you that this was going to happen. Let's see what they're trying to do. It gets worse. Listen. Standards of behavior. Students, faculty, employees will not celebrate or advocate for the murder, killing, genocide, or annihilation of any individual classmate or any group of individuals in our community. Students, faculty, employees will not engage in hate speech, whether veiled or explicit, that incites violence. Students, faculty, employees will not use language that threatens the physical safety of community members. Students, faculty, and employees who violate the above standards of behavior will be subject to immediate discipline. Notice how vague this is. This piece here will not use language that threatens the physical safety of community members. That could be anything. Someone can say something to you and you may feel, oh God, I'm threatened. No. This is the problem with universities. I told you, this is what they do. When they make these policies and rules, they make them vague. Jonathan went on to say, I understand the impulse. Universities must take hate seriously, but this proposal would be unenforceable and likely backfire against what it aims to achieve. This is the risk in a fraught political moment. The institutions overreact and adopt policies that chill speech. He goes on to say, not hard to contemplate a range of scenarios that would confound and complicate enforcement. Could educating about abortion be categorized as advocating for murder by critics? You see the problem? He goes on to say, how would an admin determine when a word is veiled hate speech versus just political provocation? Jonathan, you're starting to see it. What if a student or faculty celebrated the murder of bin Laden? What's to stop an intellectual discussion from being construed as a threat to physical safety? And what's subject for immediate discipline? Sounds like a recipe for knee-jerk terminations or suspensions. I warned people about this. This is what universities do. I worked at MIT and I worked at Harvard. Can't speak on UPenn, but I'll give you an example of vague language that actually sparked controversy at one point. This is years ago. No smoking on campus. Actually, this one happened at BU as well. No smoking on campus. So they make a rule and they say you can't smoke on campus, right? Okay. So because it's vague, the question from students becomes, what type of smoking are you referring to? Well, students are not allowed to use illegal drugs on campus, okay? But in Massachusetts, marijuana is legal. Well, students are not allowed to smoke on campus. Smoke what? Marijuana? Cigarettes? What about vape pens? And so this was during the time when vape pens were becoming trendy or popular, whatever you want to call it. And some students thought they could vape on campus. They didn't consider vaping smoking. Now, that one isn't as serious, obviously, as this one about free speech. But that's just an example of how universities use vague language and it can kind of mean anything. So now UPenn they're changing their rules, but once again, the rules they created are vague. This could apply to anything. Anyone can say something to you at UPenn and it may bother you and you can just say, I feel threatened for my safety. Now, why are universities willing to move this way? I've said this before, especially schools like Harvard and MIT. These universities have relied too long on big money donors. Harvard has the largest endowment in Massachusetts in the United States, the largest. They have donors like Robert Kraft, who owns the Patriots. A lot of their donors are former Harvard alum, CEOs, executives, billionaires, millionaires. These people can pull their money at any time. Why do you think Cornel West was not giving tenure at Harvard University? You think it's because Cornel West didn't do the work? No, because he spoke out in support of the Palestinian struggle. And the donors at Harvard don't like that. At the end of the day, these colleges are businesses. Okay? People like to call them schools. I'm here to tell you, after working at these universities for over a decade, they're no longer schools. It's a business. It's all about making money and getting money. And schools like Harvard, MIT, Boston University, and UPenn, they have relied on donor money for too damn long. So when the donors become upset and they start to pull their money and raise hell, even Robert Kraft was on mainstream media complaining. I said, Robert, you need to focus on helping the Patriots win some football games, okay? Because the team ain't been shit since Tom Brady left. Instead of focusing on foreign policy. It all revolves around money, people. And billionaires are very powerful people. They're more powerful than the president of the United States. That's what you have to understand. The president is a puppet. The billionaires are above the president. So it's not uncommon for the president to do billionaire bidding. And a lot of these billionaires are in bed with the Israeli lobby. So instead of fighting your neighbor, instead of fighting the person that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party told you should hate, you got to understand who our enemy is. Our enemy is the top 0.01%. That's who our enemy is. And this is why I tell you, as long as you have corporate money in electoral politics, things won't change. All those politicians are bought and paid for, even the ones who did not take corporate money. They went into the party that's corporate. So the moment they get out of line, AIPAC pushes them out. And that's what you see that's happening right now with progressives in Congress, with the squad. And that has been happening for years. It happened to Cynthia McKinney. It happened to Dennis Kucinich. This is what they will do to you people. I don't know what is going to happen with the president of Harvard and the president of MIT. I'm not sure if they're going to resign, but if they do, I'm pretty sure that's going to be a lot of outcry here in the Boston area. Let's go to some of the comments here. Fred, I found this channel by clicking on a thumbnail of your first interview with Jimmy Dore. Oh, wow. You've been with me for a long time then. That's a long time. Zach says, I found this channel from Jimmy Dore when he was covering Nina Turner's smear of Jimmy and then showed Sabby's response. Interesting. Foxy said, saw you on another channel. Amanda, I think I found you through the algorithm. That's a first. Here on YouTube. Yeah, that's a first. Tamara says, I saw a video on my home feed and decided to watch. I'm glad I did because I've learned so much from you. Thank you for all the work you do. Thank you. Lee, I believe I first saw you on The Hill Rising, then decided to follow you, Sabby, then learned about RBN. Thanks for giving me hope for the future. Keep up the good work. Thank you. And the Oracle says, like the smear campaign against Julian Assange. Bingo. Thank you for the super chat, Sparky. Happy Sunday, Sabby. Great work. And Red says, Robert Kraft sponsored a trip to Israel for the NFL Hall of Famers back in 2017. You see what's happening? See how this works? Focus on winning some damn games, Rob. Thank you for the super chat. Obama loves Larry Sinclair. Israel is not looking for Hamas. They are taking Gaza for the oil. We're going to get into that in just a second. Eric says, that's the frustrated Pats fan in Sabby speaking. Yes, they suck. Thank you for the super chat, NK. Amen, Sabby. The only war is class war. Okay. We are moving on to our next story here about Abby Martin. So Abby Martin, she has been to Gaza. She has a documentary about the Palestinian struggle in Gaza. You can watch it on Means TV last time I checked. But Abby Martin is going to explain to you what the real goal is here. She's going to tell you why they're targeting journalists. I'm going to tell you why they're targeting other institutions and why they're targeting the children after this. But listen to Abby explain to you why they are attacking journalists in Gaza. And then we're going to go back 2 years ago, and we're going to look at the warnings that Abby Martin tried to give to people back then. Again, this did not start October 7th. This has been a problem for a long time. Let's go ahead and get into this clip here. American journalist Abby Martin explains why Israel is targeting journalists. Listen to this.
All the journalists that they're killing, targeting, who else can get away with this? Who else can do this with impunity? They're killing the truth. And that even came out, like, I think in a Politico article, it said Biden and his cohorts were scared that journalists were going to get in and show the complete devastation and ruin in Gaza during the truce, and that might shape American minds, Brian. That's what they're scared of. They're scared of Americans turning against this colonial genocidal project because they don't want us to see the truth. That's why they're systematically taking out the journalists. They want everyone to die. They don't want any semblance of civic society left. That's why they're taking out all the best and brightest in Gaza, all the staff of the hospitals. I just saw a video today of NICU babies that were left to die from Israeli soldiers that were invading the hospital. Who does that? Who, with any shred of humanity, can see babies laying helpless and leave them to die? That is what's going on. And they don't want us to see this. And that's why the disgusting appendages of U.S. empire, these so-called journalists that are essentially just stenographers for the Israeli media, can just go up there and just repeat lies. How dare they call themselves journalists? How dare they? How could you be a journalist and not, with every fiber of your being, speak out against this country, this government that is taking out your colleagues? How could they do that?
So they're killing the journalist because they want to kill the source of information. So what do you do first? You take out the journalist. They don't want the information to continue to get out. Had it not been for those journalists in Gaza, will we have the video footage of the children being pulled from the rubble? If it weren't for those journalists in Gaza, that's why you get. So the first thing, again, with the propaganda machine, you kill the source of information. So that's why they're killing the journalists. Now, in reference to the children in the hospitals and the schools, what else do you do? If you are trying to destroy the culture, you have to erase the institutions that allow the culture to exist in the first place. Number one, the schools. You kill the source of education. No schools, no education. Next, the hospitals. You kill the hospitals, you kill the source of health and medicine. The doctors, gone. It's not just about the children that were killed in the hospital. If you destroy all these hospitals, where are all the Palestinian people supposed to go if they're sick from disease, from the dirty water? If they're injured because of the acts of war, because of the airstrikes, where are they supposed to go for treatment? How are they supposed to get surgical procedures done if you don't have the hospital, you don't have the medical equipment? So you take away the health line, education, health. Now we're going to move forward to the children. Why the children? You killed the children to destroy the future lifeline. That's destroying the next generation. This is no different from, if you think about, look at other genocides that have happened throughout the world. Look at the Armenian genocide. How many Armenian people do you know? By the way, it took a long time for the US government to finally acknowledge the Armenian genocide. Joe Biden acknowledged that. I think it was his first year in office, but the first time it was acknowledged was under Donald Trump, his presidency. That was decades ago. They finally acknowledged that it was real. This is what you do. You kill the education. You destroy the health line. You destroy the next generation. And last but not least, you destroy the journalists, which means you kill the form of information. So that the only information and the only propaganda that is released is the one that they want you to see. That's how you take a culture down. 2 years ago, Abby Martin tried to warn people about what was happening there. 2 years ago, the very first time I talked about Israel and Gaza on this show was almost 3 years ago. It's crazy it's been that long. Almost 3 years ago, it was a story of a 10-year-old girl who was standing in rubble because her entire residential building was bombed. And she said, what am I supposed to do? How can we live like this? I'm just a kid. So for some people, they're just now hearing about this because of October 7th. I've talked to friends of mine that had no idea what was happening to people in the West Bank, had no idea what was happening to the Palestinians in Gaza. The first time they even heard about it was October 7th. But independent journalists have been covering this for years. Norm Finkelstein has been researching this and has been there in person for a decade. 2 years ago, Abby Martin tried to warn people then. Listen to this.
As shocking as what's happening in Palestine right now is, it's really nothing new. This week, we've seen Palestinians get kicked out of their homes at gunpoint, tear gassed, shot and killed, arrested for absolutely no reason, and now Gaza is being bombed by the IDF relentlessly. But it's also important to remember that the Palestinians have been experiencing these things on a daily basis for the last 73 years. So to understand the true weight behind the spike in Israeli terrorism, we have to first understand the historical context, which...
Pause for a second. Listen to what he just said, and let me know if this sounds familiar.
As shocking as what's happening in Palestine right now is, it's really nothing new. This week, we've seen Palestinians get kicked out of their homes at gunpoint, tear gassed, shot and killed, arrested for absolutely no reason, and now Gaza is being bombed by the IDF relentlessly. But it's...
That was 2 years ago. 2 years ago. Let's bring in Abby Martin here.
Palestine. Abby, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So in the past week or so, the issue of Palestine has basically become the talk of the world. And, you know, there was this whole issue in Sheikh Jarrah, and then we saw the Israeli troops start firing into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And now, just a week later, Israel is collapsing. They're bombing buildings in Gaza. I mean, can you give us an overview of how we got here?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when you're looking at corporate media, of course, it always starts with the rockets and then, of course, the unequivocal declaration that Israel has the right to self-defense. You absolutely never hear about what precedes such rockets. And you absolutely never hear about the context, the overall analysis of, you know, the historical context that preceded all of this, right? And that continues to be ongoing. As you mentioned, Sheikh Jarrah, which is a neighborhood in East Jerusalem, mobs of extremist settlers that are armed, mind you, have been expelling Palestinians out of their homes that they've had for generations in this neighborhood. We've all seen the videos. They are very harrowing and horrifying. People being thrown out of their homes by force, all of their material objects being thrown violently out of their homes. You have settlers who are obviously from America in the yards of Palestinians saying, if I don't take this home, someone else will. so I have to take it. This neighborhood has been under assault for quite some time. These settlers have just been waiting for what they deem as a mandate from the Israeli courts that they've been fighting for decades to try to seize and expel these Palestinians from East Jerusalem. Now, I think the important context to this also is that East Jerusalem, just like the West Bank, is under brutal Israeli martial law. Military law forbids Palestinians from protesting, convening in groups of 10 or more, raising a Palestinian flag. All of these things are illegal under martial law.
So do you hear some of these things? These are the things that when you hear people like RFK Jr. say, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. That's an AIPAC talking point, you guys. When you follow the propaganda machine, they're all saying the same thing. It's the same words. Listen to what Abby Martin is telling you. You can't even raise a Palestinian flag.
And so it is very brave that Palestinians are protesting, let alone resisting in the ways that we're seeing now. So, of course, Sheikh Jarrah was violently mobbed by these settlers, thousands strong, chanting death to Arabs and burn their memories. Palestinians peacefully resisted these mobs of violent settler attacks. And of course, soldiers showed up to brutalize them and violently suppress the protests. And of course, all the Israeli soldiers stand on the side of the settlers.
Now, why is that rhetoric okay, according to Congress, according to people like Bill Ackman, according to AIPAC? Why is it okay for the state of Israel or for the settlers? Why is it okay for them to say those words to the Palestinian people who are already there, living in their home, minding their own damn business? Why is it okay to say things like death to Arabs? Why is it okay for them to say that? But the Palestinian people can't say from the river to the sea.
Now then you have worshippers, hundreds of worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is the third holiest site in Islam, stationed in Jerusalem, praying during Ramadan. And then you had IDF soldiers storm the mosque, launch stun grenades and smoke bombs inside, tear gas as well, inside of the mosque, sent hundreds of worshippers to the hospital. This is a war crime, right? This is a war crime that what they did was actually tear gas and launch smoke bombs inside of the hospital after the worshippers were sent there. And then you saw harrowing footage of thousands of extremist settlers chanting, burn their memory again, erase their names outside of the burning Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is a mosque that is ancient. It's 100 years older than the Notre Dame Cathedral. All of the historians were in mass uproar when the Notre Dame Cathedral was burning, and there is quite deafening silence over the intentional burning and attacks on this ancient compound. So all of this preceded the rocket attacks. Hamas, the governing force in Gaza, of course, issued a statement saying, we will retaliate if these attacks continue. And I think Israel made a miscalculation here. I think that they thought that they could violently expel these Palestinians and commit this ethnic cleansing with zero retaliation. And that was a miscalculation on their part because, of course, we saw the rockets fired in response. And Israel, like it always does, issues a wildly disproportionate response, demolishing entire homes with sleeping families inside.
And the other thing, and I'll comment about that in just a second, but notice what Abby Martin just told you. All of those events she just laid out for you, all of those things happened prior to the rockets that were launched. When mainstream media tells these stories, again, they're part of that propaganda machine. When they tell these stories, they leave that part out on purpose. And they start with Hamas sent rockets. They leave all that other stuff that Abby just told you happened prior to that. They leave that out. Again, that is on purpose. This is how they manufacture consent. And you think you're getting the real story. If you only watch mainstream media, you can sit there and believe it like, oh man, this is crazy. They just started attacking Israelis like that for no reason. Oh God. Not understanding what happened prior to. Now, I don't wish death upon anyone. And I don't like violence. But it's important that you know the full story. And people aren't getting the full story. Now, this piece where she said here towards the end, I just want to make sure
There's a wildly disproportionate response, demolishing entire homes with sleeping families inside.
That part right there. Depending on what type of permit that is attached to your area, you may get a notification that they're coming to kick you out of your house, or you may not. So Miko Paulette talked about this in person when I saw him at MIT. You'll see that video later on this week. He said some people will get a notification and they're like, you got 5 minutes to gather your stuff and get out. Some people don't receive a notification. They could come at any time. They could come in the middle of the night while you're asleep. How is that okay? So you see, all this focus that U.S. Congress and that mainstream media has right now, having you focusing on which phrases are okay to use and all this stuff. By the way, you never see them do this with Black people. You never see them go to this extreme lengths to make sure that Black people are safe and protected in this goddamn country, okay? Let's talk about that. You never see them do this. Never. Because there's nothing in it for them if they do that. They don't get anything out of us. You hear me? They don't get anything out of us. We have no power. Organizations like AIPAC do. So now mainstream media is trying to shift your focus. They want you to pay attention to phrases so that you're not paying attention to all the videos on social media coming across your way of these kids being pulled out from underneath the rubble. People being kicked out of their homes, violently kicked out of their homes in the West Bank right now. This has been happening for years. They don't want you to pay attention to that. So they had to, let's put their attention on something else. But it doesn't seem to be working.
With sleeping families inside. And I just want to pose to viewers just this analogy, because I think it's really a stark analogy. Imagine a mob of armed Muslim extremists storming an ancient synagogue, chanting death to Jews. How do you think the media would respond to that? Or how about this? Imagine, let's say, a mob of Trump supporters that all were armed with weapons in an immigrant community in Texas, storming through the immigrant community, seizing people's homes and occupying them, violently throwing out the immigrants on the street. I can't imagine how liberal media would cover such a situation. So it really just shows you the extreme hypocrisy when it comes to media coverage of what's happening in occupied Palestine.
Yeah, you know, and speaking of double standards, I mean, Palestinian activists have been told forever that Israel isn't a racist country, its existence and its history isn't based on the hatred of Arabs, and that it's actually a super progressive country, and that it's the only democracy in the Middle East, so-called, that they respect LGBT rights and so on. But this totally clashes with what we're actually seeing and what you're describing just now. And, you know, you're also seeing people, Israelis, who are saying, oh, well, this is just, you know, the work of some extremists. They're dismissing it as extremism. But it really seems like this sentiment is mainstream in Israel. What do you think all of this that's happened in the last week, what do you think this really says about the political climate in Israel, and how widespread are these views?
So think about what he just said. Again, he brought up that talking point, the only real democracy, right? Again, I'm telling you guys, that's an AIPAC talking point. That's why all of them say it. That's why AIPAC says it. That's why other politicians say it. That's why RFK Jr. says it. It's like all these people went to the same convention, right? Doesn't seem that way. If you pay attention, you notice they're all saying the same thing. Nothing original of their own. Think about that.
I don't know many democracies that actually forbids 5 million residents, that it controls, you know, every aspect of their lives, prevents any sort of democracy for those 5 million residents, 3 million in the West Bank, 2 million in Gaza. So yeah, I wouldn't call Israel democracy, but it is interesting also that they've been able to run with the narrative that they are LGBTQ friendly, and that they're this egalitarian place that welcomes, all religions to have a place there. I mean, look, with its foundation, Israel is a settler colonial state. It was founded, of course, in the immediate aftermath of World War II. And right after the foundation of Israel came the Nakba, which was the horrific ethnic cleansing that expelled almost 1 million Palestinians from their homes, razed 500 Arab villages. Those who didn't leave their homes were killed.
Did you guys hear that? Those who didn't leave their homes were killed. Like, did you learn about this in history class? Why isn't this in your history textbooks? Slavery's in there, right? And even with slavery, they leave a lot of things out. Think about it, guys. This is what they don't want you to know. But it's important that you understand and know the history. And when we talk about the whole issue with ethnic cleansing, it's not even just the Palestinian people. Did you know that the ethnic cleansing, it goes further than that? We talk about the Ethiopian Jews. Yes, there are Ethiopian Jews that live there in Israel. Did you know that a couple years ago, they were sterilizing Ethiopian women against their will? So the women didn't know. They didn't know that the shots that they were giving them was sterilizing their bodies. Don't believe me? Look it up. Google it. Google it. Even The Guardian covered this. Now all of a sudden, everyone seems to forget. Everyone forgets about this. Jake Tapper, all these mainstream media commentators, everyone keeps talking about the Palestinians. Don't forget about what happened to the Ethiopian women. Now, why would they do that? Why would the state of Israel do that? Why would they do that? Again, to prevent the next generation. Now, tell me again. Tell me again. It has nothing to do with ethnic cleansing.
Several years after that, in 1954, was the Prevention of Infiltration law that basically said that any refugee trying to return there was a shoot to kill order. They also talked about laying mines in the routes of returns for refugees. So this is an order that's still in place. Of course, the enemy has somewhat shifted. Of course, they shield themselves from being able to commit these crimes with Hamas, now that Hamas is governing the Gaza Strip. But this has always been a rule that's been in place since the foundation of Israel. And Israel itself is a state that is founded on top of indigenous land.
So that part right there is very important for people to hear and understand. Denying Palestinian people the right to return, that happened prior to the creation of Hamas. And I say this because I've heard people make that talking point. Well, the reason they don't let them return is because of Hamas. No. That was in place before the creation of Hamas. When they removed them from their homes, there was never a return. You could not come back. Imagine if that happened to you. Imagine, let's say you're from, I don't know, Texas, but let's say you move. Let's say you move to Canada, Montreal for a job or something. Imagine if you couldn't come back. Imagine if they told you, sorry, you're denied the right to return. You can't come back here, see your family or anything. Think about that.
It's an ongoing settler colonial project that has been continuing for 73 years. And every single day we see the settler colonial project continue to expand, continuing to annex the entire West Bank, continuing to throw people out of their homes in a violent fashion, and continuing to kill and imprison anyone that resists. And, I think this can all be summed up by something that's in place in East Jerusalem, which is called the demographic law, which essentially says that there needs to be a 70% majority Jewish population in East Jerusalem. So what does that mean? What does that mean if the percentage goes above 30%? Well, it means that you need to kick those people out, right? And commit ethnic cleansing to keep that artificial majority of the Jewish population. And essentially, that is what the foundation of Zionism is. It's an artificial majority that's imposed violently. And it means that in order to keep that majority, you need to expel or kill the indigenous population that is threatening that majority. This is a apartheid regime. This is a genocidal colonial occupation. And it's just quite fascinating that it's somehow been able to shroud itself in the notion that it's a progressive state and a democracy. It's quite the opposite. And you even see like founders of the state of Israel. I mean, the first prime minister, Ben Gurion, when you look at what his statements were during the foundation of Israel, he says, you know, we must expel the Arabs and take their places.
You hear this? That they must expel them and take their places. By the way, you can look up all of this on your own. Because I've read about the history of it, how it was established, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to be very clear about religion. Religion is a belief. It's a belief that an individual or a group has. Imagine if in the United States, our government created a law that said only Christians could live in the United States. Imagine if they did that and everyone had to leave. Everyone who wasn't Christian had to leave. Where do you go? Where do you go? You're not Christian? We're kicking you out. Think about that for a second. How many of you watching are not Christian, not religious at all? This is why we have something like separation of church and state in this country. But in the state of Israel, it's gone further than that. This is the point that Abby's trying to make when they talk about Zionism. Zionism is not Judaism. This is about Jewish nationalism. Now, what's funny to me is that the same people who sit up there and say that they despise Donald Trump because he supports nationalism. They said this when he was in office, right? And I don't support Trump either. But some of those same politicians support Zionism. Make it make sense. Everyone, homework assignment for this week, look on Open Secrets, and I want you to see. Look at whoever is politician that represents your district that's in Congress. Look up their donors. Look and see how many of them are in bed with AIPAC. We've already talked about Hakeem Jeffries and Richie Torres on the show. We know they are. Look how many of them are taking money from J Street or AIPAC. Look this up.
This was an explicitly articulated sentiment across pretty much every leader of Israel, no matter how progressive the United States depicts them. I mean, look at Levi Eshkol during the 1967 war. He said, if we don't give them enough water, maybe their orchards will wither and yellow. And I think that that's a policy that they've obviously continued in place in Gaza, where people do not have clean, potable water and haven't for some time. It's a completely untenable situation. It's unlivable. And it's atrocious that people who call themselves progressive can actually bend over backwards and make the mental gymnastics to excuse this and somehow pretend that you can be progressive, except for the case of Palestine.
I was looking at this poll from Hebrew University in Jerusalem, which surveyed Israeli youth, and it said that 66% of Orthodox youth, 42% of religious youth, and 24% of secular youth, quote unquote, hate Arabs, and 49% of religious youth and 23% of secular Israelis say they want to strip Palestinians of the right to vote. You guys at the Empire Files released a video called Everyday Israelis Express Support for Genocide, which the video kind of speaks for itself. I want to play a short clip for viewers. And by the way, these interviews were shot in a park called Tolerance Square in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. But here's the clip.
Let me pause here for just a second. So notice what he said about the Palestinians having the right to vote. This is another statement that RFK Jr. heavily pushes. He said they can vote, just ignoring like the dirty water and all these things that are happening to Palestinian people, but they can vote. Did you hear the poll that he just read? That the majority of people there don't want them to be able to vote. Now, this is a piece from Abby's documentary. Listen to this.
Also that every Arab that doing a terrorism attack, we have to kill him, and not because he's an Arab, because he's a terrorist. I think you should also kick out the family, because it all begins with chinuch. How you say
education. I don't think there's any answer to it. Really? There's only one way. Like, I would carpet bomb them.
You would carpet bomb them?
It's the only way you could deal with it.
I think that we're miserable. The Arabs make a piguim, and we need to kill Arabs. No.
You guys hear this? Now, again, I ask you, why is it okay for them to say that, but it's not okay for you to have a protest to support the Palestinian people? Think about this, guys. You don't hear Bill Ackman talking about this. You don't hear RFK Jr. talking about this. And we'll finish up here.
Okay.
We'll talk about this later.
And how God punished is the sins by other people. He said, he sent the Nazis, he sent, and now he sent Palestinians.
And I mean, these clips are almost prophetic in the way they sort of predict what's happening right now in Jerusalem. And what really amazes me is how nonchalant these people are. I mean, you hear people in the US talk about, being liberal Zionists and, Zionism isn't racism, whatever, but everything we see coming out of Israel is just this ultra right-wing nationalism, and it doesn't really seem like anyone stands against it, or if they do, they're quiet about it, or they're being coerced into being silent. Is there any real opposition to this racism in Israeli society? And if so, how are anti-racist and left-wing groups perceived in Israel?
Well, even Bet Salem, which is a human rights organization that simply documents what's going on, is considered an enemy, right? The word leftist is actually a slur in Israeli society.
See?
And I think people have to wrap their minds around what even the notion of liberal Zionism means, right? It's kind of this pink-washed notion of what Zionism is at its core, which is a racist settler colonial state that mandates that millions of people are kept under colonial occupation, brutal occupation. And then, of course, there's Gaza, 2 million people caged in this open air prison. So the fact that liberal Zionists, they just kind of want to believe that they are progressive, but at the same time, they have to accept the reality of what Israel is. And they have to accept the reality of it's an exclusively Jewish state. What does that mean?
Right.
For the Arabs and the Palestinian population that live there? What's really the reality there is that there's this current of genocidal bloodlust throughout Israeli society. You can see this reflected in poll after poll. You can see it reflected in just the results of the elections, right? The vast majority of Israelis support the Likud government. They support Netanyahu. They support the ethnic cleansing. They support the ongoing massacres and atrocities carried out in Gaza. They support the ongoing occupation. And
So this is 2 years ago. If you want to watch this full video, it's called Palestine 101 with Abby Martin, Breakthrough News. This was 2 years ago. Again, guys. So she was warning people back then. She has a documentary there, Dan Cohen, like multiple people have made documentaries about what was happening to the Palestinian people there. But I do want to say this as well. Like you gotta really understand and grab this for what this really is. There have been so many lies that have been told. And I'm just like, guys, if you just do a little bit of research, some people don't want to because they don't want to piss off family members, or they don't want family members to become upset with them. Let's be real. Let's talk about it. Some people don't want to hear the truth because they know it's going to be painful to hear. And then there are some that do know the truth, but they just continue to deny it because it's easier to do that than to cope with reality. But not everybody feels this way. It's important that you know not everyone in the state of Israel agrees with what Netanyahu and the IDF are doing. Not everyone does. And for those people, and there's video footages of this as well, for those people that push back, that are Jewish and push back against the IDF assaults them too. We have to educate ourselves. If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button, guys. Thank you. That helps me out with the algo. Going to go to some of the comments here, and then I'll get to the one on Rockfin as well. Thank you for the super chat. None of your business. Love your work. Thank you. Thank you so much. JB says they're taking out the voice of the people. The U.S. supporting this means they don't believe in free speech. This explains why they persecuted Mumia Abu-Jamal and Julian Assange. Exactly. Thank you for the super chat, Sparky. Sabby, I found you in the last couple of years when I was on my boat fishing. I think that I searched Nico House or Jimmy Dore looking for a particular video of theirs. Interesting. The Oracle says independent and social media has interrupted the manufacture of consent and complicated the propagation of propaganda, i.e. narrative shaping and control. Colin says INN News reported flying Palestinian flags are illegal with Brett Wilkins, journalist from Common Dreams, last fall. See, these are the things that people need to see, you know. Thank you for the super chat, Sarah. Love you, Sabby. You are appreciated more than you know. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sparky. I found you to be particularly telegenic, thoughtful, and insightful, so I subscribed. Thank you so much. Thank you for the super chat, Dijon. This war has united the Arab world with China, Iran, and Russia. Yes, it has. Yes, it has. We talked about on Friday that the U.S. government wants you to believe that Russia is isolated. Russia is not isolated. Russia has other friends. Thank you for the super chat, 007. If it were 1938, world would declare war on Israel? Ooh, that's a good point. Thank you, George. Between two geographically and political significant bodies of water, all humans will live in liberty. Bleep that, smart Alex. Teddy says, Sabby, will they start concealing the donor lists that are readily available online? I can see that coming. So you have to report your funding. Like that, they do have to do. Like that's required by the FEC. So I don't think they can take that away. Thank you for the super chat, Dijon. Long war, folks, as China and Russia share tech weapons with Iran. Thank you, Teddy. Thank you again, 007. The madder Sabby gets, the harder she hits the mouse. Poor mouse is getting a beat down tonight. Sorry, thought you needed a laugh. Tough subject today. This poor mouse. It's so loud too. Like when I click it, it's like, this is so loud. Thank you for the super chat, Penny. Does Tucker support freedom for Palestine? I don't know. That's a good question, Penny. And thank you, none of your business. Free speech as long as you don't talk. Bingo. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin Hemp Car. What we have experienced in South Africa is a fraction of what the Palestinians are experiencing. Nelson Mandela said, Israel is an illegal terrorist apartheid state that has separate segregated buses for Palestinians. They keep them locked down in open air prisons. How in the F is that even close to democracy? And thank you for this tip, Roger Meadows. The source of Ackman's wealth is creating Pershing Square in 2004 and rose to fame for his short of bond insurer, MBIA, and his rescue of mall operator General Growth. At times, topped Wall Street with wins on Canadian Pacific, Fortune Boards, and Allergan. At least Musk and Bezos contribute something society can use. People like Bill produce nothing. They make money off of money. Peeps like Bill are leeches on society. That is correct. You guys know how I feel about billionaires. Like I said, Just because they may be nice to you one day, or just because they have donated to philanthropies, doesn't mean they're not going to look out for their class and corporations. We've been talking a lot about free speech. In this next segment, we're going to talk about one of probably the most prominent journalists of my generation, Glenn Greenwald. He's been on this show multiple times. It appears that now even Glenn Greenwald may be preparing himself for a ban. Yes, believe it or not, it appears that TikTok is trying to ban Glenn Greenwald of all people. Let's get into it. Ay, ay, ay.
All right, so it's kind of ironic when you report something and then very shortly after that, you have a personal experience that in many ways verifies or vindicates the thing that you reported. So we did a segment last week knowing that we know that many of you have become convinced that TikTok is this weapon of the Chinese Communist Party that they use to get at the minds of American youth. In particular, that they're propagandizing them, they're turning against them against the country, they're filling their head with all kinds of crazy ideas. And we tried to show you that that is a false narrative. TikTok is run by a Singaporean who was born in Singapore. He's a capitalist. He went to the London School of Economics. He then went to Harvard Business School. He then worked for Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, and it was really interesting when he actually testified in front of Congress. They kept saying he was Chinese, and he's like, I am from Singapore. And I know in his mind, he was probably thinking like, look, not every Asian person is Chinese.
They have American management, American shareholders, and the United States has become one of their most lucrative markets because of how many millions of Americans choose to use TikTok. And they don't want to be banned from the United States. They're willing to do anything to stay here. And one of the things they've been increasingly doing is saying to the United States government, look, we don't care about political speech. If you want to tell us what political speech you find damaging or dangerous, just tell us and we'll censor it. Remember, they censored the Bin Laden letter once it went viral. Why would they censor the Bin Laden letter, which explains to Americans or tries to convince Americans that 9/11 was the fault of the US government for interfering in that region and bombing that region? If they were interested in being divisive and dividing the American people against their own government, they would love the Bin Laden letter. They would let the Bin Laden letter viralize. They wouldn't censor it, and yet they did censor it. And this first came up for us because we had a video in December of 2022, so a little bit more than a year ago, that was highly critical of President Zelensky and the Ukraine war and the narrative from the United States. There you see it on the screen, erasing inconvenient truths.
So pay attention to the date of the video. He said December 2022. So this is another example of these platforms actually removing old videos, right? So at the time when you posted it, they didn't seem to have a problem with it, but they have been known to go back in time and remove old videos that you may have posted.
And this video started to go rather viral. And obviously, the Chinese Communist Party wouldn't want to stop this. It was a video critical of U.S. foreign policy. That's supposedly what the Chinese Communist Party wants. They want people hearing content like what we produce that is critical of the U.S. government, the U.S. security state.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, we got a notice. There you see it on the screen. Video removed. This video violates our community guidelines. It was a segment like the one I just did about the lies around the war in Ukraine. There you see the video details Ukraine President Zelensky is a corrupt authoritarian oligarch, despite what Western media is trying to tell you. And the reason cited was integrity and authenticity. Trust forms the foundation of our community. We do not allow activities that undermine the integrity of our platform or the authenticity of our users.
Wordy language. Trust forms the foundation of our community. We do not allow activities that undermine the integrity of our platform or the authenticity of our users. Meaning what? Provide some examples, TikTok, right? Like, what are you talking about? That could be anything, anything.
We got an account warning for that, and it said your account is at high risk of being restricted based on your violation history. The next withdrawal could result in being prevented from accessing some features. Now, we thought it was very strange since this was actually the first time this has ever happened.
So sorry, I want to correct myself and make sure you guys realize it says video violation posted on December 28th, 2022. So looks like they did tag that at that point in time. Again, but typically what these platforms will not do is they will not explain to you what exactly you did wrong, right? It's just vague, like what I just read to you. Like, what does that even mean? Or they'll say things like, at least YouTube has done this to people before. They'll say that this is harassment, but they won't say what it was that was said in the video that was that. And again, that's intentional.
And we appealed this removal, and we actually won. They looked at it, they reinstated it, and they removed this warning from our permanent record. The only other time we've had any issue with TikTok was with this video in June of 2023, where we reported on how the CIA had flown to Brazil as part of the 2022 election, basically, according to the US, to warn the Brazilians not to use the sort of election fraud claims that Trump had used and that Bolsonaro was threatening to use if he lost. But it was the CIA flying to Brazil in the middle of the Brazilian election to basically intervene and say, this thing that Bolsonaro is threatening to do, we're not going to accept it. And the reporting on this was very reliable. It was from mainstream outlets.
Not only that, but he lives in Brazil. Just something to consider.
And we did a video, and actually you see there we put Portuguese subtitles on the screen so that Brazilians could hear it as well. This was probably our most viral video on TikTok ever, certainly one of them. It really went viral. And we got the same kind of notice. Video removed. The video violates our community guidelines. Here you see the CIA's benevolent interference in Brazil. And the same rationale cited. Now, let me ask you this question. If the Chinese Communist Party were censoring TikTok and controlling its content, why would the Chinese government be angry that we publish a video on CIA involvement in Brazil? Wouldn't that be something they would want?
That part right there. That's something you need to think about, guys.
If this narrative is true that they're using TikTok to turn the people of the United States against their own government, they would love our show. Our show is overwhelmingly a critique of the U.S. government and the U.S. security state and U.S. foreign policy.
And all the videos on TikTok where people are criticizing the U.S. government, criticizing the deep state, criticizing the alphabet letter agencies, they would love those too. Because it's critical of the U.S. government. It's not critical of China. So let that sink in, guys. Again, this is another example where I feel like the propaganda machine was to turn you away from outlets like TikTok because they knew some of the things people are saying on there is the truth, but it's not the narrative that the State Department has. So they don't want you to hear that narrative. That's really what that's all about. It's not about, no, we don't want you to use TikTok because China could be trying to steal our data. That's just an easy excuse for them to give and to get you to fearmonger China more, right? But the real thing is they don't really want free speech because free speech endangers the narrative that comes from the State Department. They want you to be controlled. They don't want us to think for ourselves. They want to tell you what to think. That's the crazy part.
Why would TikTok be targeting our show if it were run by the Chinese Communist Party and removing videos critical of U.S. foreign policy? That makes no sense whatsoever. It would only make sense. The only people angry by these kinds of videos from our show would be the U.S. security state, the thing we criticize.
Yep.
The entity that has previously tried to think of ways to prosecute me when I went around the world reporting on all their secret documents as part of the Snowden reporting. When I was at The Intercept, where we often publish secret documents about their drone program and their FBI spying programs. My good friends in the U.S. security state, those are the people who would want our content censored. And that is exactly who is commandeering the TikTok content moderation. This time we did appeal, and it did not get reinstated. This video was removed. We had this strike against us, but this is the only strike that we ever knew about. This week, our social media manager went to Access TikTok to post, and she got this notice. Your account was permanently banned due to multiple violations of our community guidelines.
This part right here. By the way, this has happened to Midwestern Marks multiple times on TikTok. It happened to RBN on TikTok. Like, it's happened to other people who are criticizing, particularly the U.S. government, who are telling the truth, you know, in reference to some of the foreign policy decisions that the U.S. government has made. It typically is coming after people that cover foreign policy often is something that I've noticed. But that same notification.
Permanently banned. Our account was permanently banned, our system update account. The only thing we use this account for is to post clips of this show. When we appealed it or asked for some kind of explanation, they sent this email. Thank you for contacting TikTok. We understand how important your account is to you. After further review, your account will remain permanently banned due to a violation of our integrity and authenticity policy.
So here we have TikTok permanently banning one of the most prominent journalists of my generation. Like, do they even know who Glenn Greenwald is? Glenn Greenwald, who revealed the Edward Snowden story? Do they even know who this is? And I don't even like brag about people like this, but the thing is like, there are certain journalists that just kind of stand out in your lifetime. For those of you who may have been around during the Vietnam War, that person for you may have been like Seymour Hersh. More recently, also for, I think, a lot of younger people, his article about the Nord Stream pipeline too. So some people are just discovering him now because of that. But we all had that. There's a certain voices, right? So we got to think about Glenn Greenwald started The Intercept, wanted to publish the Hunter Biden laptop story. They wouldn't allow him to. That's why he left The Intercept. Continued to do his own thing. But it's just like, that's who they banned? They just want you to dance, right? TikTok, they want you to get on there and just shake your booty, show people how to do dance moves, keep the world unintelligent and unbothered, keep you distracted. Go back and watch the music video, This Is America. Go back and watch that music video. I want you to watch it twice. The first time, watch it and listen to the sound. So have the sound on so you're hearing the lyrics. The second time you watch it, I want you to watch it on mute and just pay attention to the visual. Americans are distracted. That's something that music video did point out, how they keep us distracted with all these other things. Now, that one's typically about Black America, but it happens to everybody. They keep you distracted with all these other things. So they want you to go on TikTok and watch people do dance videos, and no shade. Not saying you can't dance. But they don't want you to see the real information about the government, about foreign policy. They don't want you to see these things. As if that's not important. They want us to remain dumb.
Please note that our community guidelines apply to both public and private videos, and that was it. We could not get any kind of an answer on why it is that our account is banned, but we know that it's permanently banned. We can't get an answer why. I hope this forever debunks this notion that the people controlling the censorship decisions of TikTok are the Chinese Communist Party. They have turned over, TikTok has, these decisions to the U.S. security state, just like the U.S. security state influences and controls the censorship decisions of Facebook and Google and in the pre-Musk era of Twitter. Because they have used this threat to ban TikTok as a way to say, the only way we're going to let you stay is if you censor the things we want.
So why would China ban Glenn Greenwald? They wouldn't. What has happened to TikTok? I saw JB said in the chat that some of the people that used to work for the NSA are now working for TikTok.
This also shows, by the way, imagine if we had this show and there was no Rumble, no platform that said to us, we're going to guarantee you the right of free speech. And we were dependent on big tech, on Google's YouTube, on Instagram owned by Facebook, on TikTok. Do you see what a stranglehold there is on free speech in the West? Do you see this? Say what you want about our show and my views, but our reporting is extremely fact-based. I've been doing this for 20 years now. I've won every journalism award that the West has to offer.
Yeah, I mean, Glenn Greenwald is an actual journalist. I mean, I just keep it real. Like, I don't even call myself a journalist. I write every now and then. I'll be writing more next year. But I don't even call myself a journalist. I say I'm a host of this show. And that's pretty much it. But Glenn Greenwald is a real investigative journalist. And they banned him. It's just like, and I wonder, did they even know who they were banning? Like, they realized what this, very strange, very strange.
There's no journalist in the United States that has won as many. Maybe there are some who have won as many, but none who have won more.
No.
And our show, if you watch it, you know that we are very careful to adhere to facts, usually facts that are easily demonstrable on the public record. We don't spread disinformation. We don't rely on conspiracy theories. This is purely content-based. Now, the last 2 months of our show has been overwhelmingly dedicated to a critique of the U.S. funding of the war in Israel and the war in Israel itself. I don't know if that's a factor, but I know that our show in general is a critique of the U.S. foreign policy state and of the censorship regime. We also did criticize TikTok as well. So who knows why, but look at how arbitrary and capricious this is. If your livelihood, if your ability to be heard rests on big tech, you're just in the palm of their hands. They can squeeze it at any time. And it's so Kafkaesque, they don't even give you a reason.
And this is why, and I will give this advice to anybody that does independent media. Of course, like legacy independent media, most of them already do this anyway. But this is why people they wear different hats, like in this space, right? So I'm on YouTube, but I'm also on Rumble and Rockfin and Spotify and just different platforms, right? So that's why more of us are on like multiple platforms. This is also why some people that are commentators for independent media also are authors, are writing books or write articles, or they may host like a radio show. Like, think about some of the people like Chris Hedges, Margaret Kimberly, Matt Taibbi. Like, they have multiple things that they do, right? They're not just like on YouTube. And I think that's very important. It's sad that it has to even come to that, not saying that they wouldn't want to do those things as well. But what I am saying is that now it has gotten to the point where you pretty much need to do that. You need to be on multiple platforms. I'll say this to anyone, and I beg of you multiple times, if you're coming into this new, and I'm still kind of new myself, but it's almost been 3 years now. You have to be on multiple platforms. I would not just take a risk and just be on YouTube. So I beg to any of you that are interested in starting this to be on multiple platforms. I'm not the best on TikTok. I'm there, but I don't post videos often. And when I do, they usually don't do well. I'm not a good TikToker or whatever. But this is very damning that they would do this to Glenn Greenwald. Not just a real journalist, but he's won multiple awards. He's known around the world. It's not like this is someone that people don't know. Like, that's what kills me. Like, of all the people, really? I'll let him finish up here.
They give you no explanation at all, let alone an opportunity to appeal or be heard. They just send you a form letter saying, no, you're permanently banned, and that's going to remain that way forever.
Yep.
This is why platforms like Rumble are so important, because if we had to rely on this side, imagine how nervous we would have to be about what YouTube allows, what Google will say we can say, what we can't say. Every time you get a strike against you on a video, you're petrified that the next one might result in the destruction of your show, your destruction of your ability to be heard.
Yep.
The range of views they allow was extremely narrow. And that's why I think this fight for free speech is the most important.
Okay, so you have to... We're ready to move on to the next screen on Type VNC. This is crazy. This is crazy. So again, like I said, for all those people who said that they were pro free speech, where are you now? Where are you now? Where's Elon Musk? Elon, yes, you did a good thing with the Twitter files. We covered that on the show. But where are you now? Like, see, this is the thing, right? JB says, my TikTok channel is throttled heavily because of what I talk about and share. Michael Gong says, please put the link in the chat, the link to the Glenn video, that one, or let me know. Let me know, and Eric can do that. We're going to move on to our final story. If you are not aware, Dr. Cornel West and Norm Finkelstein actually hosted a live event in person in New York City at the Comedy Cellar. Not just to talk about Dr. West's campaign, but also to talk about this issue with Israel and Gaza. I thought this was pretty cool. There's a couple of timestamps that I do have. I do want to start with this portion here where Norm Finkelstein is speaking about what it is like for people who live in Gaza. And he's comparing that to the younger people in the United States. So younger people in Gaza, what their future looks like. And he's comparing that to what the future of younger people in the United States looks like. I think people need to hear this. I thought this was a pretty deep conversation.
Spent really the last 15 years just chronicling in detail the kind of battery that these people have been subjected to. I think part of the reason that sometimes people can't get where I'm coming from is because they didn't live for 15 years reading about what goes on in that place. The mowings of the lawn every few years. And then the fact that people, young people, they were born into a concentration camp. That's just the fact. They have no past, no present, no future.
When he mentions this piece, I think this is incredibly important when he mentions that younger people in Gaza, they were born into a concentration camp. Can you imagine that? They were born there. And it's like, they don't know anything outside of the gate. They're fenced in like cattle. They don't know. You can't even leave Gaza without special permission from the state of Israel. And that's if you need to go to a hospital in Israel because you need to have some type of surgery or procedure done that's more advanced that maybe the hospitals in Gaza can't handle, right? But this is all they know.
And they have no jobs, no prospect of family, nothing. So when October 7th came along, of course I was shocked by what happened, but I wasn't prepared. And even here I had some differences with Dr. West. I was unwilling to condemn. And I think the reason, and Dr. West can disagree with me, and I have no problem with that, I don't think he lived for 15 years with chronicling day after day what's been done to these people. And now I get to the final point. Gaza is a kind of metaphor for what's been done to the younger generation in this country. No future, a precarious present, and a futureless future. It's, for me, breathtaking how many young people I meet who have no job or just a gig or 2 gigs or 3 gigs. The big difference between my generation and your generation, the big difference is in my generation, and I think Dr. West will affirm this, though obviously it was very different for African Americans. But they were called, famously in this book by Michael Harrington, they were called the other America. But for mainstream America, whether it be you, or you, if you were a young person, you could dream. And you know what? There was a very high probability that your dream could come true. If you said you wanted to be an actor, you wanted to be a stage director, you wanted to be a musician, you wanted to be an orchestra leader, you had those dreams in high school, and lo and behold, 10 years later, I meet my friends from high school. He did become an actor. She did become a stage director. He, she, he, they all became medical doctors. And we did not come from a privileged background. Absolutely not. We were the lower middle class. You take, for example, our current Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. He went to my high school. He was 3 years ahead of me. Guess what? You know what his father was? His father was an exterminator. Yes, I know there's a... I know.
So one thing I wanted to add here, that's really funny. I didn't know that before this, that Chuck Schumer went to the same high school as Norm Finkelstein. That's really interesting, but that's funny. His dad's a Terminator. But one of the things I wanted to mention that he referenced in reference to the younger people not having a future. So the younger people in Gaza is true. It's like they have no future, hardly no jobs, etc. And he was talking about how that compares to younger people in the United States today. Like a lot of them are working like gig jobs here and there. And I see it too. I've seen it. Even some of the students, former students that I've had at some of these elite institutions that I told you about, they're just doing like gigs here and there. And I have to explain to people where that came from, at least from what I was able to see in my adult life. If we go back to the housing crash of 2008, this is when I really started to see things change for my generation. So I'm a millennial. What people have to remember is when the housing crash happened in 2008, the people who had jobs that actually could have retired, a lot of those people chose to hang on to those jobs and not retire because we were going into a recession, right? So the housing market crash was really bad. So that's something I remember. So you had people that were at a point where they could retire and they decided to hold on to those jobs because we were going into the housing crisis, right? Then you had the generation before me, which is Gen X. No shade on Gen X peeps. But the generation before me, which was Gen X, they now were competing with the same jobs for those of us that were graduating from undergrad. So now you had these recent college graduates competing with Gen Xers for entry-level positions. So when the retirees held on to those positions and the Gen X people who were already in employment held on to their spots, next thing you know, those entry-level positions now require 3 to 5 years experience, whereas before they did not. This is when I saw that shift. And I believe that's why, going all the way back to 2008 housing crisis, I believe that's why even today, a lot of the younger people, their future is bleak when we look at the job market is because all those requirements changed after the housing crisis. Now, let's keep it real. Obviously, you're not going to have 3 to 5 years experience for an entry-level position if you're just graduating undergrad, right? Obviously, you're not going to have that. And that's what held some of the millennials back. So we ended up taking odd jobs. A lot of us took retail jobs. A lot of us worked in restaurants. And, you know, that kind of stalled like progress for some of us. But that's the reality of the situation. Again, no shade on Gen X, but I'm just keeping it real. Let's go back in.
There's a coincidence there. But the point I'm making now is, I remember I knew quite well his sister, Fran, because she was the girlfriend of my best friend. Very simply dressed, you can almost say drably dressed. Very simple background, but they could dream, they did dream, and they realized those dreams. And your generation has been completely devastated.
Yep.
I can't even encourage young people anymore to dream. I can't, because I feel like I am misleading them, I'm deluding them. And so I think there is at a deeper level, just as during the George Floyd demonstrations, where you saw the white young people in the demonstrations, they were so angry. And I don't think it was just anger at George Floyd's killing, it's anger at the system that's wrecked the lives of young people.
I'm still surprised that we have not had a class war revolution in this country yet. I am really still surprised, given federal minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour, given the fact that young people are struggling to get jobs, living in a gig economy that doesn't want to give you benefits. Everyone still doesn't have health insurance in this country. I am still surprised that we have not had that in this country. And I feel like it's because people, you know, we've been taught to blame ourselves. And sometimes people do make bad decisions individually, but we're not controlling the system. I told you about the powers that be, like the billionaires, et cetera. We're not the ones in control of the system and how things work systemically in this country. So I've always been kind of like shocked in reference to that.
And that's the identification with George Floyd. It's the identification with the people of Gaza. These people who are battered, and battered by this sick system. And now we have, and I mean this sincerely, and maybe it's just complete wishful thinking, but I'm hoping against hope. Dr. West, his campaign had a couple of false starts. I think he'll acknowledge that. And I said, okay, it's something new for him. Bernie Sanders had been a politician his whole life, so he knew sort of the ropes of running a campaign. For Dr. West, it's something new. But I hope, and I hope, and I hope against hope that he's going to be able to pull it off. Because there are many things to be said about Dr. West, and most of you already know him by reputation. There was one thing I learned very belatedly.
Okay, now I want to go to another part because it follows up with that when they start to get into this discussion here a little bit about W.E.B. Du Bois. And there's something I want to share with you that W.E.B. Du Bois said a long time ago that I wish more Americans were paying attention to. But let's get into this part here.
But the way of life that's being enacted in that language. And it comes from, this is why my campaign actually had a kickoff in Mississippi. I said, we went straight to the Delta, Mississippi. That's where we're going to start this campaign. How come? We start with the blues. And the blues ain't nothing but a personal narrative of catastrophe lyrically expressed. So you begin with catastrophes. It could be 1492 with indigenous peoples. It could be 1948. It could be 1848. It could be so many other historical moments where you start with catastrophe. One of the reasons why the American empire is in such deep spiritual decay and moral decadence is because, like all empires, there's been 70 of them since the beginning of the human species going back to Africa. The United States is the 68th empire. America is the 68th empire in the history of the species. And when Hegel said history is a slaughterhouse, when Edwin Gibbon said it ain't nothing but the register of the crimes and follies of human beings, it's precisely because the lies and to think you can sustain your social project on the efficacy of lies that are tied to crimes that render invisible the suffering of so many people, indigenous people, workers, women, black folk, across the board. And America is not unique. Every empire has told those lies. Every empire has attempted to subjugate, demean, and degrade other people. And so the question becomes, how do we generate fight back? Because if you believe as I believe, that most of the human history is the history of domination and oppression and exploitation. It's the history of organized greed, institutionalized hatred, routinized indifference.
Even when we talk about the greed portion here, you have to remember what lies along the coast of Gaza, right? We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, oil and gas, which the Palestinians have no control over. So that's part of the greed portion there. Also, this idea to expand into a greater Israel, to expand into part of Lebanon, to expand into part of Syria. Again, greed. The land that you have is never enough. We want more. We want more. And then there's the hatred portion that comes in as well.
The suffering of poor people and vulnerable people. And Rabbi Heschel says indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. He's absolutely right. And as Malcolm X reminds us, sooner or later you're going to reap what you sow. Chickens come home to roost. No lie, no crime can live forever. Truth crushed to earth will rise again, and it will take the form of people fighting back. Not individuals together in solidarity, fighting back. And so the question then becomes, well, what do we do in this particular historical moment that Brother Norman's just laid out so well, in which the young folk, tired of the lies, America telling itself they were a land with no people. Quit lying, America. Australia said the same thing. Canada said the same thing. Israel said the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Liberia, when black folk went to Liberia, all they saw was just land. No, there's some indigenous peoples there. And you're just imitating the worst of America, even though you're beautifully black, because what I'm talking about is not reducible to skin pigmentation. I'm talking about what kind of human being you choose to be. Not reducible to your sexual orientation, not reducible to your gender identity. It has to do with what kind of human being you choose to be, given the fact you're trying to create these magnificent moments of interruption and eruption. Our great teacher, never forget the great Sheldon Woolard. His thesis advisor, my thesis advisor. Isn't that beautiful? First time we get a chance to meet and give a hug, and we got the same thesis advisor. Sheldon Woolard was one of the great figures.
The difference is he got a job.
That's the truth.
Yeah, so it was interesting. There were some funny parts as well. Norm said he got a job. So I want to go to this piece here as well, because Norm was also asking Cornel West questions. I thought this was an interesting point to bring up here. This is when we're getting into W.E.B. Du Bois. I think I said Du Bois earlier. Some people say it that way. But W.E.B. Du Bois, listen to this.
Point. Du Bois is describing the horrible lynchings that occurred at the beginning of Reconstruction, or at the end of Reconstruction, excuse me. And it was a reign of terror. And the lynchings were really gruesome. Most young Most people don't know what the lynchings really were like. They were not in the dark of night. They were picnic festivities. The mother.
Please pay close attention to what he's saying here about the lynchings, and then I want you to think about what's happening to people in Gaza.
Would pack the picnic basket, the schools would be let out early, the factories would be let out early, and it was on the campgrounds. It was a festive moment. The person would be lynched, then the body burned, and then the body parts were sold off in auction to the highest bidder, and then they were displayed on postcards.
Yep.
So it was really quite ghastly. And the boys describes all of this, and then at one point he says, I think white people in the South are as fine a people as any other people in the world. How could he have said that?
Because W.E.B. Du Bois actually believed, I think he did pronounce his name that way. I think he pronounced it W.E.B. Du Bois. I think that's how he referred to himself, but it is a French name because he believed that anyone could be redeemed, that anyone could change. But think about what he just told you about the lynchings, which again, a lot of history textbooks leave this part out, that this was like an event for people to go to. It's not like this was something that was done in secret. This was a very public show. People would come sit and have like picnics, just like he said, and watch Black people hanged. Like serious. This is a real thing. Now, public humiliation, that is another way that oppressed groups are demonized. They humiliate them. Public humiliation, that's another way that they hit at you, not just physically, obviously, mentally and emotionally, but that's another way they make you feel inferior. Now, connect this to what's happening in Gaza. I just saw a video yesterday of a group of Palestinian men that were stripped by the IDF, and the IDF was trying to claim that they have weapons. Now there's another video, thanks to Walter from the Gray Zone, another video that's been released showing that apparently there's been some altered scenes in that video footage. They were trying to say that these guys had like semi-automatic weapons in one video, and then you see the other video that has not been edited showing that that was not the case. So again, the propaganda machine is very strong. But that being said, these men were publicly humiliated. This is not the first time. They were doing this to them before October 7th, publicly humiliating the people in front of everyone. That's another way they make them feel inferior. They make them feel less than. You can't walk down the street without being confronted by these soldiers. How is that any different from when police officers used to patrol Black neighborhoods back in the 70s and early 80s, especially during the drug war? How is that any different? How is that any different from stop and frisk? You have to make the connection between the IDF and the police in the United States. And you have to understand and know that the IDF trains the police in the United States. That's where they get it from. So that piece there, I thought was important. I want you to understand the connection. And then we get to this moment here from the event, which I thought was pretty telling as well. There was a question from the audience. I think this is the one with the question.
Hi.
Yeah.
My name is Vinny. I live in Bayonne.
Be let out early, and it was on the campgrounds. It was a festive moment. The person would be lynched, then the body burned, and then the body parts were sold off in auction. So it was all of this in the South. It was as if my parents, after coming out of the concentration camp, saying, footnotes that went on and on and on. I wanted people to see
irony, and
I'm not sure that was ironic.
I think it all the wretched capacity for them. Can you just shout it out?
Hi. My name is Vinny. I live in Bayonne. What's very confusing to me is we hear about, Israel breaking international law. We hear international law brought up so many times. How come we're never hearing, I guess the term would be court cases in international law? Like, why is there almost like a Teflon to the US or to Israel when it comes to international law?
I thought that was a very good question. Why is there a Teflon with the US or to Israel when it comes to international law? Listen to this.
Well, I mean, the thing is that international law is really a joke when it comes to being seriously executed for the wretched of the earth and the most vulnerable who don't have power and pressure to bear to reshape the way in which the weak, feeble international governance operates, which is the United Nations and a few other international agencies. Now, when I say joke, I mean, I don't mean that in just the Freudian sense of just a certain kind of both catharsis as well as incongruity, but I mean that it has the capacity to raise the voices. The Secretary General right now of the United Nations, he's got a decent voice. He's a decent brother from Portugal who ran the Socialist Party. But his voice is about as strong as pre-sweetened Kool-Aid when it comes to execution within his own institution. Because the imperial powers can veto anything. The American Empire had the nerve to veto a humanitarian ceasefire in the face of genocidal assault.
And they were the only country to do so, for those who are not aware. Now, the UK abstained. The UK just kind of a lot of times follows what the US does, but the UK didn't vote against it, but they chose to abstain, which is really interesting considering Britain was the one that chose Palestine as the place to settle. But the US was the only country that voted against it. That tells you something.
My God, how low can you go? I mean, even those Southern elites didn't talk about, well, how wonderful this lynching is every day to kill 7,000 children in 40-some days. How sick can you get? But it's been done before.
Yep.
It happened in Rwanda. It happened with Armenians. It happened with Jews in Germany. It's been done before. It's a human thing at our worst. So in that sense, when they say international law and the Palestinian brothers and sisters are saying, where is the international community? And we say at Comedy Cellar what? Here we are. We care about you. We see you. We're in solidarity with you. We just don't have the institutional power at the moment.
I hope they know, because, if you're trying to flee, you're at war and you're spending most of your time trying to flee or finding food wherever you can at this point in time, just keep in mind, like, they're not sitting at home watching TV. They're on the move. And tomorrow they could be on the move somewhere else, just trying to get out of the line of fire, or they're trying to dig someone out from the rubble. So I don't know. And in Israel, they've killed a lot of the journalists. So I don't even know if people in Gaza know that there are a lot of protests that have been happening all across the world, not just in the Middle East, but all across the world in favor of the Palestinian people and their right to self-determination and to end the genocide. So I hope they know, but I don't know if they do, But this vote from the United States, it makes us look really bad. And I want people to understand that not everybody here agrees with that. In fact, I would say the majority of people do not agree with what is happening to the Palestinian people. But I think this vote makes us look really bad. And it makes me wonder, this vote from that guy, that gentleman from the UN, who, by the way, he's an alternate. He's not even the permanent person for that position. He's the alternate for that position. And his vote actually had so much power. An alternate. So for Mr. Woods to make that vote, he is representing the United States. And that can give the world this impression that this is how Americans feel. When the majority of us, I would say, do not approve of what Mr. Woods did. This is how these representatives put us in the line of fire. They make us look bad.
But we raise our voices because we know that international law, and he's laid out in the magisterial text that he's written on Gaza and other texts. We know that it's a joke when it comes to serious translation. And that's a sad affair, but we should never allow the sadness to have the last word. Never. We got a right to be sad. We got a right to keep swinging and fighting. We got a right to keep serving the people. We got a right to lay out our vision and our analysis. And they say, well, you've got the chance of a snowball in hell of winning. You say, well, oppressed people been told that for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And keep track of the fight back. Be a part of the fight back. Keep your integrity, honesty, and sensitivity, and your humility. As I said before, we all crack vessels now. We all fall short. And as we told our group, 3 o'clock, Blues Man from
Okay, and then I want to get to the final piece here, which is a question from Norm Finkelstein in reference to what Cornel West will do in the end. I think people need to hear this as well.
Sure, yes, indeed. Next question. Fall, but I still fall short. All of us in the end fall short, yes, indeed. Next question.
I want to just say just a comment
Sure.
on what you just said, because I take seriously the campaign and possibility. I think one has to be principled. If you're not principled, you're going to lose people. Bernie was able to get as far as he did because people trusted him. That was the bottom line. He had a 50-year track record. So people thought, okay, this guy's the real deal. And I think that was a large reason why he was able to gain. Of course, it was his platform. But, Marianne Williamson took over his platform, and she ain't going anywhere. It's his track record. It says 50 years. So you have to be principled. However, I do believe you have to be strategically flexible.
Yes.
In the case of your campaign, and this will be a disagreement, and that's fine, because Dr. West tolerates agreeing to disagree. I do not believe you have to start off saying we're going to the end no matter what. I understand where that sentiment is coming from, but I do believe it's perfectly possible. You get to October, you see that you can't get more than 20% of the vote. That's very optimistic, but I do believe it's possible. You see that you can't get more than 20% of the vote. It's perfectly reasonable among adults, and we have to treat the constituency as adults, not children, to simply say to them, I'm not going to get more than 20% of the vote, which means I'm not going to win. However, I think we can put forth 4 demands and make those demands non-negotiable.
Okay, let me explain what Norm is talking about here. Norm is saying if we get to October and you realize that you're not going to get 20% of the vote, at that point, he believes that Dr. West should make demands to Joe Biden to get his supporters on board for Joe Biden. And he'll explain a little bit more of this as well. But this is, different from what, Dr. West said, which is that he's in it all the way to the end. I actually don't think he should drop out. I don't think that Jill Stein is not going to drop out. Green Party candidates don't drop out. They go to the end. I don't think he should drop out. And I say this because we have already been tricked by this before. Like, we know that Joe Biden is not, you can't push Joe Biden left. We were proved, like, Bernie Sanders proved this, right? Like you can't push him left. So, and whoever they put in for Joe Biden, if he chooses not to make it all the way to the end, you're not going to be able to push them left either. And I don't see anyone going into Joe Biden's spot being willing to call for an end to the genocide and stand up to organizations like AIPAC either, except for someone like Cornel West, Jill Stein, and Claudia De La Cruz. We all know RFK Jr. won't even do that. So I think the thing is I think that you might as well stay in it all the way to the end, because we've already done this before. We know that Joe Biden is not going to cave to those demands. He'll probably say yes, but then once he's reelected, he's not going to do anything. And I really feel that the Democratic Party has to be taught a lesson. I really do. I just, for people like me, I am in a blue state regardless anyway, but I really feel like the Democratic Party has to be taught a lesson, because I feel like if Cornel West were to do that and say, here are the demands, I'll go ahead and drop out if you promise to do these things, then Joe Biden is reelected and he doesn't do those things, just like he did with Bernie Sanders, then it's like we're rewarding Joe Biden for genocide. And I'm not willing to reward Joe Biden, Democrats, Republicans, anybody. I think this is really the chance to disrupt the duopoly. I really think this is our chance to do that with Dr. West, Jill Stein, Claudia De La Cruz, and even RFK Jr. and his crazy ass, with all of them running together outside of the two-party system. Guys, I think this is our best shot to really disrupt it. That doesn't mean that either one of them may win, but I think we really have to cause a ripple effect, right? We got to start sometime. Not 10 years from now, not 20 years from now. So I disagree with Norm there.
You say to Biden, you could start off with a simple demand. You got to free Julian Assange. Yeah! That has to be, that's a non-negotiable demand. Number two, and I see it all the time, that student debt has destroyed a generation. It has destroyed a generation. You promised to get rid of it before, you didn't. You're going to have to make an ironclad promise to do it this time. Well, that's a separate issue. You put forth 4 demands. You say these are not negotiable. Either you give in to those demands or you don't get my 20%. You give in, you get my 20%. Now, some people will say, of course, they're going to say yes, and then they're not going to keep their promise. That's okay.
I'm one of those people. I'm one of those people that say they're not going to keep the promise.
Because it's not over with Election Day. That was the big problem with Bernie. He ended it on Election Day. Cornel can still say now, you broke your promise, we're going to fill the streets. And people will respond to that because a promise was made, the promise was broken, and the struggle continues. So I think we have to be principled, but not foreclose possibilities in the future.
Yeah, so this is where I think Norm and I disagree, because like I said, we've been through that before. And Bernie said he was going to be outside with his people if he lost in the streets. And we know that didn't happen. Granted, I know Dr. West is not Bernie Sanders, but I really just feel like the Democratic Party needs to be taught a lesson. They need to be taught a lesson that they can't continue to sit up here and lie to voters and treat working class people the way that they've treated them. They can't continue to pander to the African American community without doing anything for African Americans in this country. And especially if you're African American, I would tell you, oh, hells to the no, do not support them. Because the thing is, what are they doing for you? Every other group gets concessions from the Democratic Party except for African Americans. So there's no point. I think the Democratic Party needs to be taught a lesson. So that's where I do disagree with Norm there. But I want to show you what W.E.B. Du Bois, or whatever you guys want to call him, Du Bois, he referred to himself as Du Bois. I'm going to show you something really quick that he said called Why I Won't Vote. This was in reference to the two-party system. And it's this piece right here. In 1956, In 1956, I shall not go to the polls. I have not registered. I believe that democracy has so far disappeared in the United States that no two evils exist. There is but one evil party with two names, and it will be elected despite all I can do or say. There is no third party. On the presidential ballot in a few states, 17 in 1952, a socialist party will appear. Few will hear its appeal because it will have almost no opportunity to take part in the campaign and explain its platform. So things are a little bit different now. This is before there was a Green Party. This is before there were more people willing to run independent. But guys, W.E.B. Du Bois told you back then, 1956, I will not go to the polls there because there's no such thing as two evils exist. Here we are in 2023, and mainstream media pundits have continued to tell us over the past couple years that there is a lesser of two evils. And this goes to show you how much people have read and how much people know about history in this country. Because if people were reading W.E.B. Du Bois, the people would know he told you back then there was no such thing as the two evils. There's one evil. So we have to educate people. We have to send this to more people. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I will put the link to this in the chat. This is the type of stuff we need to talk about. Like, seriously, like, we can't just, show up and say, don't do this, don't do that. We have to tell people a little bit about what did some of these scholars say? What did Malcolm X say? What did MLK say? What did they tell you and warn you about back then? When we look at the issue of Palestine, Malcolm X warned you about Palestine a long time ago. He told you about what the Palestinian people were going through. This is the real history, folks, not just the history that you see in your textbooks that's been whitewashed, that's been watered down so that you can digest it. We have to look at all of history, even the parts that are uncomfortable. So think about what he said. There is no lesser two evils. This is what we've been trying to tell people. Evil is evil. But he continued to say back then, if a voter organizes or advocates a real third-party movement, he may be accused of seeking to overthrow this government by force and violence. Does this sound familiar, guys? Read that when you get the chance to do so. Did I put it in there, Eric? Yeah, it's called W.E.B. Du Bois, Why I Won't Vote, Why I Won't Go to the Polls. Read that when you have an opportunity to do so. I think a lot of people need to hear that. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. This is why history is important. Thank you for the tip, Rockfin Roger. Chuck's ancestors originated from the town of Chorkiv, Galatia, in what is now Western Ukraine. Schumer attended Brooklyn Public Schools, scoring 1,600 on the SAT and graduating as the valedictorian of James Madison High School in 1967. Bernie graduated from the same high school in 1959. Yep, Sabs, Chuck, Bernie, and Norman all went to the same Brooklyn High School. That is wild. That is wild. Okay. All right. And I'll go to these comments here. Travis says, French Sabby Du Bois. I know, but he called himself Du Bois. Du Bois. We need critical thinking. You don't change the uniparty. The uniparty changes you. Good third party or bust is a must. Thank you so much for that. Again, please read that from W.E.B. Du Bois, Why I Won't Vote. It is very important that you read that. It is longer than what I read for you because I do have a hard stop, but please check that out, guys. Other than that, guys, that is it. I do have a couple of interviews that are coming up this week. Chris Hedges will be here. Margaret Kimberly will be here. And there may be one more. There may be one more, but you'll find out. Other than that, guys, have a good night. Keep up the fight.